and welcome to the first episode of The Glittering Bell Jar. As you heard in the introduction, I'm Valerie,
And I'm Brie.
and we are two writers. We are Harry Potter fans, and we are distant from one another, of course, because it is that time of life. But we are so excited to be here today. We have a brand new idea for how to look at the Harry Potter series, and that is by reading it backwards.
Yes, we are very excited to take you through the Harry Potter series in a completely new way, and we're hoping that you will do it alongside us.
So here's how it works. Every time we start a chapter, we actually start by going to the end of the chapter and reading the last sentence, and then starting the chapter. So what you'll hear in the episode as we work through chapters is that I will read the last sentence of the chapter, and then Brie will give us a little bit of a synopsis so that you know exactly what happens in that chapter. And the idea here is that we are getting a totally different perspective on the characters, the storylines, how things fit together. And let me just say, we are starting with Deathly Hallows, and starting in the epilogue is a very interesting way to start any book.
Yeah, it's completely mind-blowing, and I hope you guys do it alongside us because we are picking up so many new exciting things that I never saw before, and I've obviously never read a book this way or a book series, so it is very fun.
It is. And now I know people who, like, when they go to the bookstore, because there are really still bookstores in the world and they're great. You should go to one if you haven't been to one lately. They
Yes.
go and they pick up a book and they read the last page first. I am not
Yep.
one of those people. Do you do that?
No, that is like I'm more of a rule follower when it comes to that kind of thing, and that is breaking the rules. Like you don't do that. It's not okay. It's like writing in your book, which I'm doing in this podcast. I'm writing in these books. I know, okay, but
Oh my
it's
gosh.
I only did it a couple times and I felt my hands were like shaking, you know.
Yeah, I
Not
couldn't
really,
do it. I
but
couldn't do it. I am reading my original series that I got as the books came out. There are lots of sticky notes. There are no notes. In fact, I have discovered my copy of Deathly Hallows has both water and sun damage from reading it.
oh.
And I am so sad because there's nothing you can do about those things. It just happens to books sometimes. But these books are well loved, but not written in. How could you?
Shame. I've been shamed.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Not to go into a different universe, but definitely some shame throwing over here. Okay, so let's just jump right in because this is
Sure.
a huge starter pack, if you want to call it that. These first three, or should I say last three chapters, one of them is, I think, the longest chapter in the book, if not the whole series. It's like a
Mm-hmm.
behemoth, the middle chapter we're going to discuss today. But let's just start at the beginning of the end, which is the last sentence of the epilogue. So I will read
Yeah.
that and then Brie will have you give a synopsis.
Perfect.
Here we go. The scar had not pained Harry for 19 years. All was well.
Mm, love that.
So what happens in the epilogue, in case people forgot?
Yeah, sure. So it's 19 years later, and we get a look into what life is like for everyone in the Harry Potter universe. The scene is set. The kids are all headed off to Hogwarts. Ginny, Harry, their two sons, James Sirius and Albus Severus, and daughter Lily Luna are all there together, and then end up meeting Hermione and Ron, and we see a couple other people, and we get this just whole picture of what life gets to be like for them.
Okay, I have to interrupt you because how do you know that that's Lily's middle name?
I saw it said it.
What?
Isn't that so cool? I know,
I've
this is one of the things
never
I
noticed.
caught.
I've read this chapter so many times and I have never noticed that.
It's on the first page.
What? Oh my gosh, I'm looking now. I have to
Oh
double
wait,
check.
or
I'm
maybe
not
I
that I don't
googled it.
believe you. If you googled it, that's fine. But like, that's so cool. That's so cool. But what is with this family and their alliterative sounds? It's very tough for kids to have names that are like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did want to point out that as far as I know, I read that last sentence first, but I think let's switch it the next time where you're going to give a synopsis and then I'll read the last sentence because
Yeah.
that might help flow better into the story. And what I wanted to say is that I don't know if it's true. It was sort of this urban legend that was going around when the Harry Potter books were coming out that J.K. Rowling actually knew exactly the last word that she was going to end the series on,
Mm-hmm.
which as writers, we know like the last word is very important. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there are some things in travel writing, which is what I do a lot of, where they tell you to pick your last word early or first. Know what
Mm.
final word, because that sets the tone and the essence of the final act of your story, which may determine the rest of your story. And so, interestingly, what I heard when I was a young Harry Potter fan, younger anyway, was that the final word she wanted to end on was scar. But that's not the way
Yes.
this one ends. This one ends with all was well, which is actually, I believe, a more settling, more comfortable word to end with
Mm-hmm.
well. So I'm wondering if that was part of it or if it just didn't work out when she finally sat down to write it.
That is super interesting. I have never heard that. And I also am glad that she ended up with well, because it just gives us a little bit of a conclusion, a nice ending for Harry. It's like she's letting us know, like, I'm gonna give Harry a rest. Like, I'm giving him some peace. All is well. He's okay, guys. He went through all this. You guys are gonna be okay too. Like, just this finality.
Yeah, I mean, especially for us, we grew up with the books coming out, so it
Mm-hmm.
was and the films, it was a almost 15 years between the books and the films coming out that we were growing up with Harry and his friends. And so it wasn't like kids today who can just read all seven in like 2 weeks or whatever and, not have
Yeah.
that sort of transition and not have that same attachment. I mean, I remember finishing this book and mourning the loss of a friend. And this
Mm-hmm.
this epilogue helps let me know that he's going to be okay, even though we're not friends anymore, basically. Another thing I found really interesting, just coming back to the 19 years later, is that you and I are actually younger still than Harry, Ron, and Hermione are in this chapter, but not by
Yes.
much. So we are in our early mid-ish 30s, and they
Yep.
are 35, 36, 37 at the time that this chapter happens. So I feel like I'm way behind on having kids because my kids are I don't have anything yet, and they're not
Yeah.
going to Hogwarts anytime soon. So interesting to do that life perspective.
Oh
I'm almost
yeah.
finally through the end of the book.
Wow, they really had kids young, didn't they?
They did. Yeah. I mean, they
Wow.
were together. Like, if you think about it, they left Hogwarts and for several years they didn't have kids, but in their early to mid 20s, they did start having kids,
Yeah, because
which
James already went to school
for at least 1 year. We think
at
just
least
one
one
year.
year.
That's what I've always
So
thought.
he's
Yeah.
12.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah,
So they were
22,
like mid
23.
20s,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't know, maybe not interesting to anyone else, but kind of interesting to think about. I guess when you meet the person that you want to marry when you are in grammar school or secondary school, naturally people who get together sooner have kids sooner if they're going to have kids. So that makes sense.
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
Okay, so let's jump into this chapter and talk about it a little bit. I have a bunch of notes. I'm sure you do too.
Of
The
course.
first thing I wanted to point out, I've always found it really interesting. This is very right at the beginning, as she talks about the family crossing the rumbling road toward the station.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because she has two alliterations. She has Rumbling Road and City Station. But I have been to King's Cross Station. Have you been there?
I have.
Nobody parks on the other side of that road. The
No.
road that's right next to King's Cross, you wouldn't park over there. I don't know.
No.
I can't get my head wrapped around the geography. So I'm just going to let that be a little bit of magic.
Mm-hmm.
Because even the Dursleys, when the Dursleys first drop off Harry at King's Cross Station, it's the same situation. I'm like, where are these people parking? I don't know where that
Right.
parking garage is.
That's so funny. Yeah, I never thought of that either. But
Yeah.
I think I was just so excited to go into the station that I didn't really pay much attention.
Yeah, and for those listening, if you've never been to King's Cross Station, you're a Harry Potter fan, you've probably heard of it. There is a platform 9 3/4 entry, and there is a great Harry Potter shop that actually has Harry Potter items you cannot get anywhere else in the world. Like there are some that
Hmm.
are only available at the studio tour, and there are some that are only available at King's Cross.
Maybe we should go back. I feel like maybe like our 1 year anniversary, we should just like do it in London. So
We're going to do a tour, right? That's what people do when they have a podcast. Yes, I mean, you never need to give me an excuse to go to London. That's my favorite.
No, me either.
Okay, so what stuck out to you in the epilogue?
Yeah, sure. So I think one thing that really stuck out to me was the chapter as a whole was it was almost like what Harry's life would have been like had he had parents instead of like the experience that he did have. So, you would have had James and Lily, they're coming, and then you have all of their friends. Lupin is meeting them. Sirius is meeting maybe with their kids too. Like it may have been more joyous like that, like a reunion. So it's interesting to think of, what could have been.
Yeah, I definitely got the sense of that when reading this too. I think that it's something that she doesn't really address, probably because we've just in reading it in chronological order, you've just come out of a really traumatic finale, and so you
Yeah.
don't want to bring all those emotions back up. But I can imagine for Harry, especially, I would actually love to read the chapter of him taking James, his eldest, the first time, because presumably
Mm-hmm.
that's the first time any of them have gone to platform 9 3/4 since
Mm-hmm.
they themselves left Hogwarts the last time. So
Yeah.
it'd be like almost 20 years that they had been in that physical space. And spaces are super important to J.K. Rowling. The way she writes it, rooms, buildings,
Hmm.
they have a lot of meaning. They come up over and over. So I don't think it's any accident that the finale, the epilogue happens on platform 9 3/4.
Well, and I don't know if you caught this, but he said touching the scar absent-mindedly. So it obviously is a little traumatic being there for him, having his middle child go back to school. So it almost is like, it was the first child to go, because he immediately is like, oh wow, this is where all this happened for me, and I'm letting my kid like go there. Like,
Yeah,
so,
that's a really good point. I never caught that.
and then of course Lily says they're going to be okay, and he says, I know, almost like, I know, because of like the sacrifice we all made, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because we don't get any sense of what they're doing outside of this one little scene that we get to observe.
Mm-hmm.
But I always thought, and maybe this is in, the extended universe, the canon or whatever, that
Yeah.
Harry goes on to become an Auror, or the head of the Auror office, the head of magical law enforcement. And so presumably if anyone's causing trouble, he's going to be dealing with it at some level, which means
Right.
that maybe not everything is well, but he's making sure everything is as well as it can be. That's what I've always
Yeah.
kind of pictured in my mind. It's like they drop off the kids and then they go back to their jobs. I say normal jobs, but it's wizarding jobs.
Right. I think you're right. I want to say in the Potterverse, like that is what, or the Wizarding World, I guess what it's called now. But I do
Yeah, it might
believe
be in
that's
Cursed
what he
Child or
becomes.
something.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good point. He's like, yeah, I've got this. Like, not only did I help
Well,
fix it
all's
back
well
then.
because I'm on it, right?
Yeah, that's a very Harry like mindset. I got this.
Yep. Okay, so a couple other things that I picked out in the epilogue are some of the characters that get brought up here for us.
Okay.
So, and
Yeah.
this is, I think, a theme that we're going to see a lot is that we follow other characters backwards too. So we're obviously reading Harry's story, but there are several other characters that
Hmm.
jump out to me, and I think probably jump out to you that we want to kind of like keep a little eye on. So the first
Yeah.
one for me, which is one of my favorite characters when reading the books, was Draco Malfoy. He obviously makes an appearance here. I
Hmm.
think it's funny that he has a receding hairline because my image of the Malfoys from the movies is like there's no hair problems. Lucius Malfoy
No.
has
Right.
gorgeous locks. Narcissa has a great style I hope to rock one day when I have a big streak of gray hair of my own. And Draco, doesn't have any hair problems, but in the books he does. So even Muggle genetics play a role for the Malfoys. um, yeah, very, very interesting, very brief, but they kind of acknowledge one another. And I think that's the most you could have hoped for these two, Harry and Draco, is a
Yeah.
ambivalent acknowledgement after so much animosity between them.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I do love that. And they brought up Neville too. Neville being a professor, which is so interesting. Like he wants to, yeah, our man Neville. Um,
Our man Neville, because you're going to see, we love Neville. We have talked about this podcast idea for a while before we started recording, and we love Neville. Neville Fan
yes.
Club. That's our backup name.
Yes, yes. But yeah, he was a professor, and I think that's interesting. He chose to go back and kind of protect it, almost like the protector of Hogwarts or something. So
Yeah.
I would like to read more about that. Like, what's he doing? What's he teaching?
And there's only one thing he could be teaching, right?
Oh, true. Herbology.
Has to be
Obviously.
herbology. I
Yeah,
mean, it'd be great if he
obviously.
were teaching like defense against the dark arts, which he could do. He certainly could do.
Yeah.
But I think it's probably herbology.
Yeah, fair enough. Okay. Did you catch any? Percy, but literally Harry's still like, oof, like, like putting his hand up, like, oh, I don't see you.
Yep. I thought that was a funny little nod, and I'm wondering because Percy is significantly older.
Yeah.
He's 4 years older. So is he there with his wife or spouse? I don't want to assume any gender things. We know, despite
Right.
recent problematic headlines, that J.K. Rowling did have gay characters in the books.
Yes.
Don't want to make any assumptions there. But yeah, could be Percy with his own child. We certainly have Teddy Lupin
Mm-hmm.
and Victoire, who we had not obviously met earlier, but is, I would presume, Bill and Fleur's
Right.
child. Like who else
Mm-hmm.
would name their child a French name? It's a very pretty name.
Yes, it is.
Those are the main ones that I picked out. And then of course
Yep.
there's lots of name dropping, literally name dropping, like James,
Yep.
Sirius, Albus, Severus.
Which
I thought
is
it was interesting.
So funny.
Go ahead.
Oh. Go ahead.
Well, I thought it was interesting that Hermione and Ron named their daughter Rose when
Mm-hmm.
it's Harry's family that has the flower names of Petunia and Lily.
Mm. Okay. Interesting. Hmm. I wonder if there's more to that.
Yeah, I wonder if it's a different character name because I found Hugo to feel very literary and like Hermione loves books. So
Yeah.
obviously she's going to be drawn to those kinds of names. And I don't think Ron really cares.
No, probably not. Yeah, so I thought it was interesting that the names that Harry gave to his kids, of course, you have James, and then you have Albus Severus, and James is actually teasing Albus Severus, which is kind of funny because in real life, right, James and Sirius would have teased Severus. So he's still kind of that same. It's like he picked up some of those traits from his grandfather and from his, great godfather.
Yeah, that's a good one. I've not caught that before.
Yeah.
I also think he probably learned them from Ron and his uncle George.
Probably.
He's
Honestly,
got a lot
probably
of
the
that.
most likely.
Yeah, trickster runs in the blood in the family.
Yeah, for sure. Anything else that you caught in this chapter or this epilogue?
I did not. That's sort of it for me. I feel like this chapter feels like a beautiful, smooth, like buttercream frosting on a cupcake or something. It goes very quickly, very easy to read, and sort of sits separate from the rest. And you'll see as we jump into the rest of the episode that these chapters take a definite turn from this sort of rosy, idyllic finale that we get in the epilogue.
Yes, yeah, it gets pretty deep and dark fast. So
cool. So let's jump back in time for Harry, at least, and talk about the final chapter of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. It's chapter 36, The Flaw in the Plan.
yeah. So in this chapter, Harry wakes up in the forest with both him and Voldemort on the ground. You can hear Voldemort waking up, assuming that he has killed Harry. He has Hagrid carry Harry to the castle to let the resistance know that he has won and they should surrender. Harry, in the middle of all that, does wake up and another battle begins. Of course, we know with Voldemort and Harry in one final duel.
Dun, dun, dun. Okay, and so the final sentence of this chapter, end of the book, really, because the epilogue is standing alone, it's a little bit long, so stick with me. That wand's more trouble than it's worth, said Harry, and quite honestly, he turned away from the painted portraits, thinking now only of the four-poster bed lying waiting for him in Gryffindor Tower and wondering whether Creature might bring him a sandwich there. I've had enough trouble for a lifetime.
Love that.
That sentence reads a lot like the end of the book, like that final word, lifetime, and I've had enough trouble for a lifetime. I love how much imagery is in just one sentence. I mean, I kind of wonder, did they leave the empty beds for Ron and Harry in the Gryffindor Tower? I mean, I guess they would have. I don't really know what house elves do when students drop out.
Right. Well, I guess nobody would be. I mean, I'm guessing nobody transferred, right? So you have the same people going from, seventh grade up? So, or no, fifth grade up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fifth grade up. So unless someone transferred, we can assume those beds just sat empty.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, actually, to think that, like, well, Dean left pretty quickly, too, because he was Muggleborn, and then Seamus and Neville are just alone, the two of them, and they weren't necessarily close. It's kind of interesting to think about these other characters, things you don't think about. That's what I catch a lot of by reading the book in this order. Think about things I never noticed before.
Yeah, it gives you a chance to check the other characters out, which is cool.
Yeah, and we plan to follow a couple of them. So Neville, obviously, we called him out in the epilogue. We're going to follow Neville very closely because in this chapter as well, Neville is super important. And then some of the others, I mentioned Malfoy, but I think I'd like to keep an eye on the Malfoys as a family. Throughout the
100%.
series, they have a hugely interesting arc, all the way from the Unbreakable Vow to Flourish and Blots. Pretty interesting.
Yeah, basically, I just want to watch the focus of love throughout the entire series because J.K. Rowling loves the power of love. And so it's just interesting to watch that. That's kind of like a thread throughout the entire thing where love kind of comes and saves people at the end of the day.
Yeah, and that's obviously important in the final confrontation between Harry and Voldemort, right?
Yeah, totally.
One thing you pointed out in your summary that I thought was really interesting is that Hagrid carries Harry. And this was
Yes.
something I caught, that
Yes.
Hagrid carries Harry to Hogwarts home. He basically carries him home, just like he does in the very first chapter of
Yes.
the book. The books, I should
Mhm.
say, not the book, the books, all of them,
Right.
in Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone, whichever one you read, where
Mhm.
Hagrid brings Harry to the Dursleys. That
Mhm.
symmetry was not accidental. I think we
Mm-mm.
see from having read the book so many times in the correct order, or in
Yeah.
the forwards order, she has a lot of threads like that throughout the books, and this one, it just feels very appropriate, very heartbreaking because Hagrid is devastated that Harry has given himself up and sacrificed
Mhm.
himself, but very appropriate that it has that symmetry.
Well, he didn't just take him to the Dursleys. He took him away from the Dursleys whenever he was 17. He says, "I only thought it was appropriate that I was the one to do this."
That's right. That's right. I always forget that. That's a really important thing. Like Hagrid is not a messenger, but more of like a carrier. He literally carries Harry through these major transitions in his life.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Which is so great. I think we're going to talk about Hagrid a lot as well, just like him and how much he loves kind of, I don't even want to say the innocent, but what he thinks is the innocent or the misunderstood is a thread you'll just, which we know that, but it's just so interesting to even watch in the final battle and how he, no matter what, he just wants to protect the misunderstood even if they're in the wrong.
You have to wonder what either Tom Riddle or Severus Snape's lives would have been like if they'd had a Hagrid of their own.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
a good natured semi
Mm-hmm.
parent for these men, these boys, as they were called. In fact, I think she calls them that in this, maybe one of these chapters we're going to talk about today. She mentions them all as being boys of Hogwarts, that and only Harry's the one who had someone other than his head of house really looking out for him, and
Yeah.
getting him in trouble a little bit.
Well, you know what though? I was thinking about Neville, and I kind of wonder, Professor Sprout, if that was more of a like a mentor to him because he did really go into herbology a lot. So, because I was like, man, it would have been nice had he received more love, but like maybe he did. We just didn't exactly see it. But we do know that he got into super into herbology, so we can
Yeah,
assume
so
he
much
did
that he
get
ends up
maybe
having tea with Alistair Moody to get a herbology book,
right.
which I loved in both the books and the movies. Yeah, I think Neville's another one of those sort of orphaned young men, whether or not
Mm-hmm.
parents were truly alive, that shows the importance of having parents and parent figures. And we see for certain, I would say the only mother figure in the entire series is Molly Weasley.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, McGonagall is like a very cold, distant mother, not really
Mm-hmm.
motherly at all. Whereas Molly Weasley, who defeats Bellatrix, hopefully that's not a spoiler to anybody,
Mm-hmm.
she is the only mother. And so Harry is at a certain point torn between trying to defeat Voldemort and trying to protect Molly and Ginny, as these women that he loves, which he doesn't have a lot of women like that he feels that for in a motherly way, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I did love that scene whenever we get to see Molly really come into her power or show us her power because we always see her as kind of like the stay at home mom, right? Where she just, she has a ton of kids and she's always cooking and taking care of the house and taking, really watching over these kids because they're all a bunch of troublemakers. Um, we never really get to see her fight. And here we're like, we really see like a mother's love, like, oh, no, this is not happening. Don't you dare come after my daughter. And she straight
Yeah.
up kills her.
And she has more magic than you would guess from a stay-at-home mom, basically. We don't ever
Yeah,
see her demonstrate necessarily advanced or complex magic, and yet
right.
she duels better than anybody, basically. I
Yeah,
mean, she takes over for three people who are dueling Bellatrix, and she's able to defeat her on her own.
right. Yeah, nothing like that's literally just saying like the power of a stay-at-home mom. You know what I mean? Like she does so many jobs, so she's got all the power, and we finally get to
Yeah,
see it,
never
which is amazing.
underestimate stay-at-home moms. They do
Right.
they do more than they ever get credit for. This is for you,
Yeah,
moms.
that's right.
Yep,
You know,
I definitely had that marked in my book for sure.
what about Bellatrix and Voldemort?
Yeah, that's really interesting. What did you catch there?
So, in the very beginning, it says she was speaking to him as if he was a lover. It's a quote that's in there. And I'm like, wait, what? Like, is she just using that? Like, it's not actually what it means. But did Bellatrix truly, was she in love with Voldemort? Did they have a thing? Did they actually have like a sexual thing going on? I can't imagine that Voldemort was capable of, obviously he's not capable of love, right? That's the whole point, is he's not capable of that, but that doesn't mean they weren't intimate, right?
It's true. He is technically still a man, so we don't really know. I think there's a
That's
couple things I think are interesting. One, coming back to your theme of love, there's a lot of different forms that love can take. So maybe if it's not an intimate or sexual relationship, it's a obsessive, passionate love. Still a form of love, and maybe a little bit of a twisted and warped one, especially when you know what Voldemort is doing, which is all dark.
Right.
But I think Bellatrix, what's interesting to me about Bellatrix is she's married. Like her husband just disappears. I can't remember which book it's in, but we learn that she's married. It might be 4 or 5. And then we just never hear anything about her husband ever again.
Yeah, I don't know about all that.
She took up with Voldemort.
I mean, maybe. And then at the end, so she thinks he's dead, and she's obviously devastated. But she finds out he's alive. Whenever Bellatrix falls, it says like Voldemort screams as Bellatrix falls, and you're like, is it because it did say they were the last two standing? And I don't think I ever realized like how at the top she was. You know what I mean? Like she was, you know, maybe second or third in command compared to Snape. And she really was probably the most loyal and obsessed with Voldemort. But how obsessed with her was Voldemort? He obviously cared that she died, but whether it's just because of power or because he actually, you know, was upset she died.
Yeah, it's interesting. The way she describes that, I just was pulling it up, is his magic is so powerful in the moment that he realizes Bellatrix has fallen. It's like a bomb. It blows everyone away. So it says McGonagall, Kingsley, and Slughorn blasted backward. Like he doesn't even maybe consciously express a spell to do that. His fury, it says his fury is that powerful. So they definitely have a special connection. Not really sure, because I do agree in various chapters that there's a lot of more laden, intimate descriptions of Bellatrix when she's interacting with or speaking about Voldemort, but I don't know that they had the same. I mean, I don't know that Voldemort could love, like you said, I don't know he could love anybody, but they certainly had a very close connection because she has such strong reactions to him, and his is equally strong and almost unconscious.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of love, did you catch the Malfoys and them showing their love for their son?
I did. Yep. That was what made me think that maybe instead of following Draco Malfoy, which we all love and follow on TikTok, aka Tom Felton, we could follow the Malfoys as a family unit, because I do believe that a lot of the decisions that are made by these characters that seem so one-dimensional and evil is not actually as evil as it seems. It is more driven, maybe singularly minded, but not exclusively from hatred, also including some love for each other.
Yes. So we actually see that whenever Narcissa, she goes over to Harry. So Voldemort is too scared. He's like, he doesn't even want to touch Harry. I think that was one of my favorite lines, which is kind of silly for this to be my favorite line, but it was just interesting. Small comfort though it was that Voldemort was wary of approaching him. So even then, you know, you can see that Voldemort didn't quite trust himself, and he wasn't as confident as he likes people to believe. But so he has Narcissa go over, and she realizes Harry's awake, and she asks, where's my son? And is he in the castle? Is he alive? And Harry says, yes, he's in the castle. And so she lets Harry go. She's like, yeah, he's dead. She essentially saves his life and potentially, you know, saved the battle, just because all she cared about. She didn't care about power. She didn't care about Voldemort. She just wanted her son. That's it.
Yeah. And it's interesting that in the way that section's written, you don't know who Voldemort has chosen to go check. Anyone else might not have made that decision. It's pivotal that it's Narcissa that's sent there, and in her own way is a very small mother, because if she had said, he's still alive, boom, game over, Voldemort's going to attack again, it's all going to go wrong. And she doesn't, because she just loves her son. Um,
Yeah.
Also, and I think we had discussed this, that we're going to do these sort of rough cut finales for each season when we finish the book of watching the movie. Um,
Mhm.
in the movie, when the Malfoys are reunited, when Malfoy is brought across the line between the two sides and reunites with his parents right before the final battle, they walk away. They literally just walk away from Hogwarts. They don't even want to be there for the battle anymore. It's a
Mm.
very different scenario than what happens in the book. It's not really
Mhm.
addressed a whole lot in the book, but it's interesting that in that it was even more dramatically that they don't care. They don't want to be part of this anymore. They just want to have each other and take care of each other and get away from this. They maybe made a wrong decision.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. So some more speaking of love. You know what I didn't notice, and I don't know how I didn't, but Harry talks about, so it says none of the spells are binding because Harry sacrificed himself. I believe page 738. So I didn't realize, so Voldemort is about to attack, I believe it's Neville, and Harry jumps out of his, out from underneath the, or first he casts Protego to protect everyone. And that spell, because he's deciding to sacrifice, or because he's already sacrificed himself and now uses that spell, it literally protects everybody. Because it literally says, like, see how you can't hurt anyone? It's because, like, me, I sacrificed, I love. You're underestimating love and sacrifice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting way to wrap everything up. I'm a little
Mm-hmm.
bit, even having read it a couple more times, I'm a little bit uncertain that the thesis is quite strong enough. Like, as
Mm-hmm.
Dumbledore says in the next chapter that we're going to move into, this is magic that has never been explored or experimented on. So it's not like there's a foundation to understand it, of like when you sacrifice yourself for someone else, what that does. Because usually when people sacrifice themselves, they die, and
Right.
other people may or may not die. This is totally out of the box magic. But I do like that it does end with this being the note that the hero, when he sacrifices himself, it actually has an impact, a magical impact,
Mm-hmm.
instead of just a emotional or spiritual one where everyone feels good. No, they're literally protected by Harry.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So let's see.
Is there anything else?
Luda makes an appearance.
Okay.
You actually don't see her very much in the battle, but right after the battle ends and Harry has to do
Yes.
his
Okay.
hero,
Yeah.
he basically a hero's tour. He sits down on a bench next to Luna, and she's like, "Do you need a break?"
Yeah.
And I'll make a distraction. Oh, look, a blibbering humdinger, which is very Luna for the final, basically the final words that we have from her.
Yeah. Yeah. And Luna actually is my favorite character.
Yeah, I know that about you. And I love that because Luna doesn't really make sense to me. My favorite character is Hermione, who's very like
Mm-hmm.
logical and straightforward, which let's take a quick sidebar. Everyone, if you're listening, we're doing something really fun this season. We hope you'll join in. If you recall from Chamber of Secrets, Gilderoy Lockhart has a quiz with a whole bunch of stupid questions about himself. So every single episode, we're going to drop a fact about ourselves related to Harry Potter, and we're going to have a quiz at the end of the season, and whoever scores the highest is going to win a prize. Prize TBD, but I will say that Brie just got us some really cool, we're calling them vintage, or what are we
Yeah.
calling those sweatshirts? They're like
Retro. Yeah.
retro. They're like a design, like a mock-up of our earliest possible design for the podcast. And
Yeah.
I think that might be at least one of the prizes. It's going to be like a impossible to get anywhere prize. So
Yes.
anyway, for episode 1, if you're paying attention and taking notes, the answer to the question of who our favorite characters are is mine, Valerie's is Hermione, and
Brie, it's Luna.
yeah. Okay, so back to Luna and the blibbering humdinger.
Yes. Yeah, you know, I love, and I would like to watch her more too. Even though she was my favorite character, I think sometimes whenever you're in the heat of reading a book, you just kind of zoom. I'm a very, very fast reader, which can often mean I do kind of, read past a few lines. Not intentionally, but some of the details I kind of skip. So it'll be interesting to see all the times Luna is there for Harry, which I do remember, but I'm hoping I find some other ones where it's a moment when she always is kind of there when he needs her.
Mm-hmm. In her
She
own
always,
way.
in her own way, she always kind of knows like what to say or what to do to help him.
Yep. I like that about Luna. I think that that's something
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to you following and pointing out to me if I miss it.
Okay.
Okay, do you have anything else in this chapter you want to talk about?
I think I'm good.
Okay, so let's do a rewind. Don't have a sound effect for that. Maybe someday.
Ooh.
We're going to go backwards to chapter 35, which is called King's Cross.
All right. This was a long one. I didn't realize how long. All three of these. We really should have broken this up. That's okay though. All right. So chapter 35. We begin the chapter. It's Harry waking up, and what we eventually discover is King's Cross. He is met by Dumbledore and a disgusting baby crying figure on the floor. Here, Dumbledore begins to explain all of his truth. Some of it we already know. There's a few maybe details we learn, but mostly it's Dumbledore just making sure Harry has all the details straight. He eventually tells him, you're not dead. You do have a choice, and you're allowed to go back to the living.
Yep. And this chapter ends with one of my favorite, I would say Dumbledoreisms, but possibly one of my favorite lines in the entire series, which is, of course, it is happening inside your head, Harry, but why on earth should that mean it is not real?
Yeah.
I love that line. I love that line because
too.
I think that in the Muggle world, we often discredit the power of our minds and how important it is to give credence and value to what we experience in our minds, even if it's only in our minds. I mean, we see this with the ongoing mental health epidemic in America, in the UK. I know it's a really important topic that they're talking about over there. It's just because it's in your head doesn't mean it's not important to you, or that it doesn't have value, or it doesn't teach you something, which, as you said, this chapter doesn't really give us too much new information. It's kind of like it could all be in Harry's head. In fact, I marked several times where Dumbledore is like, it's in your head. It's your party. It's you. You already know everything that we're going to talk about, but it's still important for Harry and for the readers, us, to have that information covered again and validated, because it's important to Harry. So it should be validated by the character he trusts. I mean, it's interesting that in his purgatory, it's Dumbledore he meets after he's just seen his parents, Sirius, Lupin. Dumbledore is the one, what would they call him? The Oracle, right? The Oracle kind of character who always has to give or affirm the important information.
Of course, yeah. But of course it would be him, right? I also love that sentence. It's just, it really is beautiful, and it is kind of a nod to the readers. Like, hey, we know this is coming to an end, but the imagination, the story, this world we've created, it's our world, and it doesn't mean it's not real.
That's very meta of you. I did not read it that way, but I love that because it's true. I mean, for the reader, especially when you're physically holding a book, it is all being created in your head. You're reading words and making it come to life, and that's valid. It's a valid experience. It's valid to be sad that we're, less than 50 pages from the end of a series that most of us who are of an age that we are spent 15 years getting through.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very good. I like that a lot.
Yes. Did you have any more Dumbledore quotes or anything else you noticed in the chapter?
No Dumbledoreisms in this one. One of my favorite Dumbledoreisms we won't get to until season 7 because it's in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. But there are some interesting things that I picked up. Gosh, there's so much here. I say so much. It's just really dense. A lot of information being presented in a very short amount of time. So I think it's really interesting. The idea of underscoring that what Voldemort doesn't understand, he doesn't care about, which is a very dangerous mindset to have in any situation. I'm not going to get political, but one could argue that by not learning about what the other side of this two-party system we live in America is talking about, you are exposing yourself to not being prepared if you are conversing with someone or something like that, right? Absolutely. Just because you don't care about it doesn't mean it's not important, especially when we just said if it's in your head, it's important. It's in somebody else's head, it's important to them.
I love that. That was a good quote.
Yeah, I was specifically thinking with regard to the fact that Voldemort had not even considered that the Deathly Hallows might be real, and so he turned a Hallow into a Horcrux in the Resurrection Stone, which is crazy that this one tiny object could be that important in two ways. That's if we're talking about things we're going to follow in the books, I want to follow the Resurrection Stone because it's not just in Deathly Hallows, it's also in Half-Blood Prince, because the ring is pivotally important in that whole book and the trajectory of Dumbledore's life.
Yeah. And speaking of Dumbledore, so I did find it interesting to kind of watch his character in this chapter and how he was almost shameful and bashful. And, you know, there was nothing more to hide. And so it was all of his secrets laid out for Harry to kind of judge and see. And he feels bad about it, you know, even in the afterlife, or even if it is just Harry's mind. Harry does realize that Dumbledore had a lot to hide and he would feel shame about it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of actually Dumbledore kind of coming to terms, or coming to Harry. I wouldn't say coming to Jesus, but coming to Harry about his past and the mistakes he made in his own words instead of in everybody else's words, which is what we've been seeing. If you're reading the book forward, you get Snape's version of it. You get Rita Skeeter's version of it. You get Alphys Doge's version of it, but you don't get Dumbledore's version. You even get Aberforth's version, but not Dumbledore himself, Albus. And so this is the chapter where Albus gets to basically attest and atone for the mistakes he made and the decisions he made.
Yeah. Yeah, although we might be finding out about Dumbledore's secrets.
Oh, yeah, that's right. As we're recording this, sorry, everyone. As we're recording this, it's the week that the new trailer for the new Fantastic Beasts movie came out, and it's called Dumbledore's Secrets, or Secrets of Dumbledore, or something like that.
Yeah.
They just call it, IMDb still kind of has it called Fantastic Beasts 3, which is definitely not the title. But yeah, I'm really intrigued by that, because the trailer has Aberforth, it has Grindelwald, and these are really important characters in Dumbledore's story. I was saying when we were talking a couple weeks ago that I really wish we could go back and see Dumbledore's young life. Like, you know, they did Big Bang Theory and Young Sheldon. Can we have young Albus, please? I'm ready.
And here we are. So very exciting.
Yeah. Okay, the last thing that I would say, I've got all these notes on all the things I'm tracking backward. The cloak is the other one, because the cloak does begin in the very first book. It is a critically important magical object in many of Harry's adventures and experiences. I mean, it's how he gets to the prefect's bathroom and Goblet of Fire. It's how he sneaks out of the castle so many times. It's an important object, but it's also a hallow, and there's some properties of it that I want to keep an eye on, specifically the idea that it is sort of impervious to magic. I think in the Flaw in the Plan, the chapter we were just talking about, they mentioned that he can just kind of like run through the battle and he's never getting attacked and nothing ever hits him. But I'm curious to explore that a little more, because I think there might be some examples where that's not 100%, but we'll get to it when we get there.
Well, yeah. So what I was going to say is actually in Dumbledore is talking, and I was thinking about all the people that blame themselves for the Potter's death, and Dumbledore is one of them. He literally says, like, it was my fault. Like, I should have protected them more. I had James's cloak, this invisibility cloak. It belonged to you. It belonged to James, and they didn't have it. But then Harry says, well, the cloak doesn't protect you against spells. And Dumbledore says, yeah, I guess that's right. So, but we're like, doesn't it protect you though? So we're going to have to watch that.
Yeah, I think when we get to the chapter about the Deathly Hallows, which is maybe the tale of the three brothers, I can't remember exactly the name. When we get to that one, I'll be very curious to learn more about the properties of each of these objects, because they do play such an important role in Harry's ability to defeat Voldemort.
Yeah. Where normally I'm like, yeah, get this over with. Like, I want to know let's get some action.
Yeah.
So. Cool. Yeah, I think that was pretty much all I caught, but I mean, which is a lot. This was a lot.
Yeah, for only being 60 pages, so much happens. Of course, it's the third act. That's how it goes. But it's also the third act of the third act of the third act, because we're at the end of the seventh book.
Right.
I've covered everything that I had taken notes on, but I'm sure there's more that people have discovered by reading backwards, which we would love to hear about.
Absolutely. You can catch us on Instagram. It's BellJarPod. Twitter, and you can email us.
The email is podcast@followthebutterflies.com, and it's slightly different, different domain, because I actually also run a blog about Harry Potter. So you can go there, you can see notes, show notes, links to buy a copy of the books that you can write in without feeling bad. All kinds of stuff like that will be over on followthebutterflies.com/podcast, or you can email podcast@followthebutterflies.com.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let us know. We want to hear from you.
We do. And if we have made any mistakes. If we have said the wrong word, had a continuity error, I mean, continuity errors must be forgiven. We are in the Glittering Bell Jar after all, but we want to hear from you. So if you're enjoying it, please shoot us a note, hit us up on social, or leave us a 5-star rating and a review if your podcast player has that option. Those are the most important way for new podcasts like us to get listeners, to get out in front of new listeners. So if you have, gosh, I don't know, 3 seconds, it doesn't take long. We would really appreciate having a 5-star rating and a review if you have the time. That might take a little bit longer than 3 seconds, but if you have the time for both, we'd really appreciate that.
And don't forget to subscribe, so every time we have a new podcast, you will know about it.
Yep. All right, that's going to wrap it up for today. Thanks so much for joining us in the Glittering Bell Jar, and we will be back with a new episode, traveling backwards through the world of Harry Potter very soon.
Yeah. See you next time.